The story of economics and institutions is the story of reason itself unfolding.
2, 3, 4.
It's a story of self-interested individuals working together to better their own life circumstances. And to understand the more complex idea of how markets and institutions are today, we must first take a step back to the starting point to understand how these institutions came about, why they came about, and what function they serve. To begin, I want you to imagine society in its most simplistic form. There is just two individuals. Now, the two individuals have to work together to help service their needs. So let's say for the day one person is focusing on getting food while the other person is focusing on making shelter, right? One person goes out, goes hunting, maybe creates a spear somehow and decides to hunt for fish in the river. On the other hand, the other person is making shelter. They're finding sticks and weaving different parts of flax together to make a hut so they can sleep under. Together, these two individuals are barely surviving, right? They're basically just meeting their needs and just staying alive and just making it to the next day. But there's no real wealth, there's no real accumulation of any goods. You know, they're struggling each day to get by, effectively. But now, if they decide to collaborate with some more people, let's say it's 4 people now, they get a little bit more, right? Because now one person doesn't need to focus on 3 different things. One person doesn't need to do, food and water and also help out gathering firewood. Instead, now this person can focus solely on fishing, for example, while another person focuses solely on hunting rabbits. Through time, the individuals get better at their own individual task. So, for example, if I'm the person in the group who has been designated to go hunt for fish, maybe through time I get a little better at understanding the movement of the fish. I understand how they swim through the stream. I also maybe design some little traps. I can create a net somehow to block the fish as they swim by, and then that stops them, and then I stab them. Essentially, I'm getting more effective at what I'm doing. I'm becoming more productive, right? Before, I could only catch 1 fish a day. Now I'm catching 3 fish a day. And when I come home with these 3 fish, I have more to give around, right? Before, the group of 4 of us were only sharing 1 fish, now we're sharing 3 fish. I've become more productive myself, and therefore I'm creating more goods for the group. And on the other hand, other members of my group who are doing different tasks are also becoming more productive at doing what they're doing. The person who is, let's say, hunting for rabbits, they're getting better at building little snares so they can capture the rabbits without having to physically hunt them themselves. Now they don't need to focus so much on just getting by for each day. Maybe they can begin to accumulate some stuff. They begin to build a little village of houses, and through time they just get a little bit more comfortable, right? Life becomes a bit easier. And if we follow this process through to the rational conclusion, we realize that the society will just keep getting richer and richer, right? The individuals get better at what they're doing, they become more knowledgeable about the area they're in, and they can spend each day focusing on new things to develop and build. So maybe someone figures out how to build a table so they don't have to sit on the floor while they eat food. They're getting better at, weaving baskets so they can collect apples from the trees as they're coming home each day, meaning they can carry more. But then, rather than just focusing on your own individual thing you're producing each day, as society begins to get bigger and bigger, we have more people focusing on the same thing. And here we enter the idea that came from Adam Smith of the pin factory and the productive nature of economies of scale, of people grouping together to work on the same thing. He uses a pin as an example, but to be a little bit more simplistic, I'm going to use a shoe, because it'll be easier to conceptualize for you. So if you give one individual the task of building an entire shoe, it'll be quite complex for them, right? They have to figure out how to do quite a lot of different things. How to stitch the sole, how to create lace, to find the right materials for it. It's a very complex thing to do by yourself. And let's say because it's so complex, one individual by themselves could only produce 1 shoe in a week. But then if you set 5 people to the task of making shoes, they become a little bit more efficient. And the reason being is that 5 individuals can each focus on one separate part of the shoe. So, one person could be working on how to build laces and make them as efficient as possible. One person can focus on the sole, one person can focus on the leather, which builds up the body of the shoe. If you're building laces, for example, each day, you become much more specialized in knowing exactly what to do, and your hands get used to the muscle memory of making them, and therefore you become more efficient and more productive. This means if you were therefore to put 5 people on the assembly line, rather than just 1 person, where 1 person could only make 1 shoe in a week, 5 people could perhaps make 10 shoes in a week. And if we connect that idea of being more productive on a production line to today, we can see it expanded into, massive industrialization. So you can think of something like an iPhone, right? An iPhone But one person creating it by themselves would be very inefficient, be very difficult. There's a lot of technical knowledge, a lot of skill, a lot of welding skills to be able to create an iPhone. But if you put a whole factory line of 100 people working on one specialized part, you can just teach them that one part, and they get quite good at it and quite fast at it, meaning the whole line becomes very productive, and the absolute quantity of amount of stuff you're making increases dramatically. Now let's take a step back to the example of our prehistoric village. Let's use the example of the group of people collecting berries and fruits and, apples. If you set 5 people to this task, maybe they can go around the bush area and all kind of collect their fruits and just dump them in a basket that they've built and bring them back to the village each day. This is quite good. You've got 5 people working on it. They're kind of producing quite a lot. They're collecting quite a lot. But we encounter a problem here. And the problem is the idea of the free rider effect. The free rider effect can be defined as someone essentially not pulling their weight in the group. They realize that because they're just collectively working together to bring things home, they don't really need to do as much work. They can rely on other people to carry the burden. So, while one person is collecting, let's say, 20 apples a day, all I'm doing is just getting a small handful of berries and putting them in the basket, in the shared basket. It's not really fair, right? So, people realize this problem happens, and instead they think, hey, that's kind of not cool. I kind of want to be rewarded for what I do, and I think if you're being lazy, you should not get anything, really. So instead of being rewarded on the collective basis, right, we bring back the whole basket together to the group, instead I want to be rewarded for what I do individually. I want to be rewarded on my own individual merits and the own effort I put into the activity. So let's say in a day I've collected 10 different things of fruit, right? I bring them home in a basket, but getting home, I don't want to have them all for myself. I can't really have 10 pieces of fruit, right? Maybe let's say I keep 2 for myself for the day. Now, with excess goods that I've produced effectively, I've collected, I've worked hard to get, I can bring those excess and give them to other people and say, hey, I will give you this fruit if you give me something you've collected. Maybe he's trading with the fish person. Let's say he says, hey, I'll give you four pieces of fruit if you give me 1 fish. And this is quite simple. Let's say I do that with the fish person and maybe with someone who's weaving baskets. Now I've used my labor that I've collected to trade goods with them to get something in return. And this can go on and on. Each day I focus on getting my own apples and my own peaches and whatever I can find in the environment, berries maybe. And I get better at it, right? I begin to kind of understand the environment around me, like know where things would be found, know where they grow, know how I can maybe store them in a basket and, collect them quicker, maybe figure out how to build a ladder to get up to the higher portions of the tree so I can be in one area and collect more at a time. And the process of trading can go on and on, right? I can bring it home each day and trade for what I want. But we encounter a second problem here. The problem is, let's say I come home with my fruit. I, this day, want to trade 5 apples, and I want in return to get 2 pieces of fish, 2 small fish, let's say, from the person trading them. But that day, that person's like, hey man, I had apples yesterday, I don't really want to have more, I'm kind of a bit full and a bit sick of apples, I'm not going to trade with you today. Likewise, that person's bringing fish home each day, and they go to someone else and say someone who's weaving the baskets, and they say, hey, I'll give you, 5 fish for a basket. The person weaving the basket is like, hey man, I had fish yesterday, I don't really feel like it. But the person weaving the basket wants my apples, but I don't want his basket. So we've created this kind of circular problem, right? I want what he has, he wants what she has, and she wants what I have. But the problem is we don't want to trade in this direction because he doesn't want any more apples, she doesn't want any more fish, and I don't want any more baskets. So we need to find some way to value the goods that we're providing for other people, and we're collecting and giving to other people. And the way civilizations decided to represent value throughout many different civilizations across time is they decided to use precious metals. Precious metals, because these precious metals represent value, right? They're hard to find, so they're a scarce and valuable thing, which we can use to trade with people. But these things are actually valuable, right? They represent some real value because they're scarce, right? People want them because they're hard to get. So, because these things are valuable, people will be willing to exchange them for the goods they're producing or collecting. So the person who's collecting fish, for example, might be willing to give me 5 fish in response for a bit of silver. Because as I give it to them, they now have something that is valuable, which they can use to trade with someone else. And in consequence, this solves our circular problem, right? Because although he doesn't want an apple today, I can give him my piece of valuable metal, he gives me some fish in return, and then let's say 4 days time from now, he comes back to me and says, hey, I actually do want some apples now, and even if on that day I didn't want fish, he could give me back the metal, the precious valuable thing, right, the gold, the silver, the bronze, doesn't matter what it is, gives it back to me, and then that means that I can give him the apples and then I have the valuable thing. And the natural progression of this idea is that these pieces of gold, metal, and bronze became refined to certain weights, right? Certain weights, shapes, and looks. And this is how the advent of coins came along. Coins are effectively just a certain density and weight of metal. It's a value of gold. It's a block of gold that has some weight, and therefore we can assign a standardized value to it to make it easy to create this kind of trading system. But issue number 3 is that through time, as we kind of get more productive, we produce more things, we're collecting more coins, right? We're getting more gold, more silver, more bronze, and we don't want to keep it by ourselves because it's a little bit dangerous because people might steal it. So instead what we want to do is we want to have somewhere to store it where we know it will be safe and that when we want to, we can get it back. And essentially this led to the formation of banks, right? Banks at the start were just places where people can keep their money safe. They can go and deposit their money, give the bank, a little sack of gold coins, and then in a year's time they can come back and get those coins and know they'll be stored there and protected. But as society became richer and more productive, right, we built more production lines, more pin factories, to use Adam Smith's example, we realized that it's a bit annoying to carry around all this gold and silver and bronze, right? It kind of expanded and people had all these big sacks and you don't want to carry a bag if you're going 5Ks to trade at the market to buy something from someone else. So we needed something that instead represented the value of the gold. And the solution that civilizations decided on is the idea of writing little pieces of paper, right? Little checks or notes which represent the value of the metals you have. So checks and paper notes don't actually have any value. Paper isn't really scarce to find, right? You can quite easily produce it. But people built an implicit trust in the value of paper because paper is backed up by some real value in the bank, right? They know that if I'm receiving a $5 note, that somewhere in a bank somewhere there's some real valuable thing that represents that. So they're happy to kind of build this trust on this paper and this exchange method because they know that if worst comes to worst, there is something real and tangible which they can go and collect from the bank. Having your paper represented by something real and tangible in the bank is the idea of the gold standard. The gold standard, where your paper was represented by something in the bank, existed all the way up until 1971. However, by 1971, society had begun to build so much trust in the value of paper that they didn't really mind if there wasn't something backing it up in the bank, right? The papers had become so standardized, the $10 notes, the $20 notes, the $100 notes, that society would be willing to kind of just accept that without realizing there's some collateral, some actual real tangible thing backing it up. So no longer does the gold standard exist. Instead, we now have what is called fiat currency. And as the gold standard disappeared, this fiat money was money that is backed and guaranteed by the government, right? But because, again, gold, silver, and bronze is quite difficult to trade with other people, it's quite cumbersome to have to carry it all around or whatever, we found a new way to back up the gold and the bronze and the silver, and something that represents that, and that's paper notes. And we now have this implicit trust in the value of the paper. We don't need something tangible in the bank to back it up. We know the government is standing behind it and representing it. We know people we're trading with also value it. And so we now have fiat currency.